I heard about a group of divers in Indonesia. And I thought, well, if ever there were an opportunity for evolution or natural selection to act in a modern human population, this would be the population. And so when I saw that no one had done that study yet, I went to my supervisor and pitched it and said, can I do this? And luckily I had a supervisor who was super supportive, and that was the start of all of it for me.
How natural selection would work with these people in Indonesia they lived on the water. These are the nomadic spear fishermen group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're called sea nomads.
Sea nomads, okay.
Traditionally, they live their whole lives on houseboats, and that's changing, in a kind of a contemporary context. But traditionally, they would get basically everything they needed from the sea. And they do a lot of that through breath hold diving. And they're extremely good at it. So they can hold their breath for a really long time. They can move underwater with like incredible athleticism. And they do this to collect things like sea cucumbers. They spear fish. And so the idea was that diving is dangerous. And so if people have been doing this to survive for thousands of years, they may have evolved in a way that made them better at it.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And what is it specifically about that part of the world that pushes them to be more of sea nomads, like to be exploring the sea for food and for this kind of stuff? Like, is there a very limited amount of resources on land there?
I think it's actually that there are just so many resources in the water. So Indonesia, that whole area, you have sea nomads throughout Southeast Asia. But Indonesia itself has like 17,500 islands. So it's just an incredible amount of coastline of these like super rich coral reefs. So there's just an abundance of resources in the ocean. So it's kind of like, if it's there, why not take advantage of it? And we actually see many places in the world where there are these rich marine resources, people dive.
Okay, so this is sort of one example of your sort of overall interest in. You would classify these people as like quote unquote superhumans, right? Because
right.
they're super adapted to a certain way of life, and they have over time, I don't know how long, but have evolved to be better at long breath holds and swimming deep underwater to catch fish. And this has changed their genome to some degree.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, people who live at high altitude, people who eat diets rich in lipids, things like that. There's these, what we call superhuman populations all over the world. And it's just kind of, the idea is most, especially medical research, focuses on disease. But that's just this really small part of the spectrum of human physiology, because we have like disease, health, and then beyond to what we call the superhuman population. So people who are enhanced in some way. And so by focusing on that end of the spectrum, first of all, there's a lot out there that hasn't been explored yet, which is really exciting. It also allows us to kind of celebrate what's special about these populations rather than stigmatizing them for diseases they may have or things like that.
Right.
And it's just like a really fun way of approaching health research.
Yeah, it's super interesting to look at, like you just mentioned, all of the science and medicine that goes into, and the research that goes into like gene editing or genetic research. It goes into like disease prevention or like treating diseases and things like this. But like, I've always been super fascinated by how you can use this technology and the science and all of the research that we're doing to improve human abilities, or like, for lack of a better term, gain of function, right?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
When it comes to these Indonesian sea hunters or these nomadic ocean people, what did you find interesting about them specifically?
So I had heard about their diving abilities, and it is truly amazing to see them in the water, how they move, how long they hold their breath. And so we thought that maybe there was something physiologically different about them. And so what I decided to measure, in part because I was a PhD student, kind of a little bit on my own with this project and trying to find something that was non-invasive and easy enough for me to learn how to measure. So what I measured was their spleen size. And so the spleen, isn't the first organ you think about when you think about diving, but it plays a really important role in diving, which is that it stores red blood cells. So it's kind of like this oxygen reservoir, because you have these oxygen-rich red blood cells just sitting in the spleen. And when you dive, your spleen contracts and those get pushed into circulation. So this increases the amount of oxygen that's circulating through your body. And so some people have called it a biological scuba tank. So you're kind of carrying around this little extra reserve of oxygen that may be able to prolong dive time or make diving safer.
Wow. So this activates only when you're holding your breath?
That's right. Yeah. So it's actually, it to a certain extent, it also is activated when you exercise. So like horses have huge spleens, greyhounds have huge spleens, and they think that contributes to their ability, to perform at such a high level in terms of exercise. But it's much more so activated by holding your breath combined with cold water on your face.
Holding your breath and cold water.
That's right. Yeah.
And you say it pumps out more red blood cells?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you get this like injection of red blood cells into circulation that are holding on to oxygen. So suddenly you have access to like 15% more oxygen.
So so how did you figure out the size of their spleens?
So I took a portable ultrasound machine.
Okay.
At first I had to learn how to measure a spleen, which is actually kind of tricky with an ultrasound.
Right.
So I was lucky that all the other people involved in my PhD program were very willing participants, because I was just having people over to my apartment to look at their spleens for practice. And then, I carried this like 40-pound machine out to a tiny village in Indonesia, after doing an initial visit where we said like, here's what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think? Is this something you're interested in? And people were very receptive. Went back with the machine and measured a whole bunch of spleens.
So did you have this hypothesis before you measured, or were you just like scanning around trying to see what you could find? Or how did you come to the hypothesis that they might have bigger spleens?
Yeah, it was a number of factors. So, one thing is looking at other animals that have adapted to diving. So certain species of seals that have a really long breath hold also have huge spleens. So the Weddell seal's spleen takes up half of its abdominal cavity. It's huge. And so we thought, okay, if it could increase spleen size in a seal, maybe it could increase spleen size in humans too. And then it's also just kind of like grounded in basic evolutionary theory, which is that in order for evolution to act, you need to have some kind of phenotype that it can act on that's likely to be something you can inherit. So we looked at like lung size or lung volume, but lung volume is really changeable. So that's not really likely something that you're going to inherit because it changes so much just based on, how much you hold your breath. Like heart rate, things like this. There are a lot of different things that we could have measured, and we went with the spleen, again, in part because it's an easy thing to measure.
Right. Just based on the size of the. So the spleens were bigger. Were they bigger because was this part of the environment, or they're part of? They weren't born like this, right? Their spleens adapted over time and over breath holds after breath hold and years of diving.
So it's actually they were born with it, because that was an important thing for us to distinguish, because maybe it's just diving makes your spleen bigger, and there had been some studies that kind of hinted that might be the case. So to check that out, we took people who were diving and people who had never been diving but had the same genetic background. So the people that I worked with, the population I worked with, are called the Bajau. It's in some countries it's pronounced Bajau, but it's one of these sea nomad groups. And if we had done this study like 100 years earlier, it would have been impossible to tell what was environmental or genetic, because everybody would have been diving. But now, because of kind of the changes in the world, I'd say about half the population or more doesn't dive. So we had this really nice split in the population between people who are actively diving, so whose spleens could have been expanded by diving, and people who were Bajau but weren't diving.
Okay.
And so we saw the large spleens across everyone.
Wow.
There was no difference in spleen size based on whether or not they'd been diving.
That's fascinating.
But there was a difference when we compared them to a population that lived like 20 miles away, who had a totally different genetic background but lived in the same environment.
Only 20 miles away.
Yeah, super close.
Weren't not divers.
Correct, yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. So if you were, say you did grow up and you weren't part of their genetic background, and say I was part of the tribe that was 20 miles away, and I came, I got adopted by one of their families or whatever, and I started diving since I was a toddler, would my spleen be normal size or would it be huge?
So based on my research, it would be normal size. However, I have seen some papers that do suggest that you can expand your spleen just by holding your breath a lot. You know, some of those papers had small sample sizes, and like I would say that ultrasounds are kind of more of an art than a science. Like there is a certain amount of interpretation, so you have to try to blind yourself to what your hypothesis is. So I'd say jury's still out, but it seems like based on everything I've seen in that population and in other diving populations, diving does not increase your spleen size. Having a genetic predisposition increases your spleen size.
Fascinating. How long have they been doing this? Do you know?
It's hard to say. We think thousands of years.
Thousands?
Yeah. So the earliest kind of written documentation was, what was his name? One of the early explorers, Magellan. Magellan had a chronicler who was writing about all of the things that they saw as they were exploring and describes in detail seeing, sea nomads diving and living on these houseboats and things like that. But that's only like 500 years ago or something like that, maybe less. But we think based on like linguistic reconstruction that they've actually been diving much longer, which makes sense because, that marine environment has been there. So
from like reading ancient texts, you can find like accounts of them?
I think it's the way, I'm not a linguist, so I don't know exactly, but they kind of like put together when that particular language arose and when certain words related to diving are likely to have been introduced. But I don't, again, outside of my specialty.
Very interesting.
But based on our genetic results, we think that they started evolving this trait in the last few thousand years.
Okay. Any of them have webbed feet or any other interesting characteristics?
Not webbed feet, but we did see in their genetics an interesting signal in a gene related to something else that happens when you dive, which is, your spleen contracts, but you also have this constriction of your blood vessels because like your fingers, your toes don't need oxygen that badly, but your brain, your heart, your lungs, they need that oxygen-rich blood. So by making the blood vessels in your extremities smaller, your body moves that blood closer to the organs that need it the most. And so they had a gene that was different. It had been evolving that has been previously linked to that effect, this like blood vessel constriction effect.
Interesting.
So we didn't measure that directly, unfortunately, but it's something we'd love to do in the future because
What was the water temperature? Well, I don't know what the water temperature is in Indo.
It's warm.
It's pretty warm, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's, they're not probably exposed to that much kind of hypothermia because it's like pretty thermoneutral water. It's very pleasant swimming water. But we do see divers in cold water populations as well.
And they put these people, they put like their offspring, they start getting them adapted to the water pretty much right after birth, right?
Yeah.
And they have like, it's interesting too how you see this this sort of resurgence of people doing water births and like babies can go straight from the placenta or the womb, which is amniotic fluid, to like a bathtub or something like that.
Yeah. It seems like we have this really instinctual drive to hold our breath. And, babies, I've heard, blow in their face and put them underwater and they just hold their breath. And, they know that that's what they're supposed to do. I heard from people who weren't Bajau, so I didn't confirm this with the Bajau, that when a baby is born, will pass the baby under a canoe traditionally. And if it makes it to the other side, if it holds its breath, it's a Bajau baby. And if not, but
right.
But I don't know if that's, that's just what other people from outside of the community had told me. So
right. Wow, that's crazy. That's a crazy thing to do.
But yeah, you go to the village and there's like all of the kids are in the water, which does make it a little bit harder to separate them into divers and non-divers because even the non-divers as children were probably diving.
How long can they hold their breath for?
It's a really good question. We don't have good data to say. One diver told me, and I did not confirm this, so I have to, put that caveat, that he in his youth could hold his breath for 13 minutes. That's about the same as the the current world record without, supplemental oxygen before diving. So,
what is the current world record that's been actually documented?
I think without breathing pure oxygen beforehand, it's around 13 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of just floating there, which is also very different from Bajau diving.
Right.
Like they are active, they're hunting. I mean, they're like walking on the seafloor and spearing multiple fish.
Yeah,
per
that's
dive.
crazy because you see some of like the free diving champions, what they do is they put weight belts on.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get to a certain atmosphere, you just start free falling with the weights.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then they think they drop the weight belts or something like that. Or maybe they don't drop the weight belts. I don't know how else they would get them. I don't know how they would get them, retrieve them.
Yeah.
But they come back up like super slow, but they're not exerting any energy at all. They have these big, long free diving fins. They're using those to like slowly come up to the surface.
Yeah.
But actually like having to crawl around underwater caves and caverns and try to like find fish and hunt stuff down and chase stuff, like that takes a lot of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's amazing. The Bajau are doing all that without fins, sometimes without weight. Oh yeah, no, a lot of these communities are really impoverished. And so, they don't have wetsuits, they don't have fins, they don't have weight belts. Many of the divers that I saw didn't. But like you said, once you get to that depth, you become neutrally or negatively buoyant.
Yeah.
And so it looks like they look like hunters.
Are there any other groups of people that you have found that similar to these sea people of Indonesia that have a unique way of living that has changed the way they evolve, or have them evolving out on like a different branch than the rest of us?
Yeah, it seems like, human populations all over the world are evolving in these really interesting and unique ways. So in my lab, we've also worked with a population in Korea called the Haenyeo. And so these are all women divers diving in very cold water. And what's cool is that this has been a tradition of having mostly or all female divers in that region for thousands of years as well. And we think that they've actually evolved in a way that makes it safer for them to dive throughout their pregnancies. Because these women not only dive throughout their whole lives, they dive often until the day they give birth. So I heard from one woman that she was diving, it was seaweed season, so she wanted to, make sure she got as much seaweed as possible, dove until 6 p.m., gave birth at 8 p.m.
Wow.
So it's a very different kind of selective pressure in that case.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they're in Korea, which is a lot colder of a climate.
That's right. Yeah. In the winter, the surface temperature of the water is like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And they were traditionally, until the 90s, they were diving in cotton. So no thermal protection. Yeah.
Which has no thermal protection at all.
Right. Yeah.
So were they similar to the Indonesian group at all? Or are these are mostly females that are doing, or all females that are doing this?
Right.
And so what were the differences between those two groups?
Yeah, so we saw some things that seemed to overlap, which was the main signal that we saw that we think is protecting them in pregnancy is related to blood pressure. So that could be related to this kind of vasoconstriction effect that we saw in the Indonesians. And then we also saw that they have a training effect, which is this lowered heart rate. So we did some simulated dives with them, and their heart rate just plummeted. So we can simulate a dive by having people hold their breath and put their face in a bowl full of cold water that makes your body think that you're diving. And so when they did that, we could watch in real time their heart rate drop. We had one woman whose heart rate dropped over 40 beats per minute in less than 15 seconds. Wow. Yeah.
That's crazy. Oh, this is them.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Oh, look, she caught an octopus.
Yeah.
They used. Did they use their bare hands, or they use spear guns, or?
They use a combination. So they have certain tools that are for getting like abalone off the rock. They have other tools that they kind of hook onto the bottom of the seafloor and pull themselves along as they collect conch and things like that.
So they are a little bit more technologically advanced than the Indonesians.
Currently, yes.
Because do the Indonesians use masks?
They do. both the Haenyeo and the Bajau traditionally did not use masks because
really?
that like technology didn't exist.
Right.
So
well, not thousands of years ago. But.
Yeah, even like a couple hundred years ago, they were mostly just diving with their eyes, which we're curious then if they've actually adapted in a way where they can see better underwater.
Wow,
yeah, these
53.
are the cotton diving suits.
Yeah, that doesn't do much.
Yeah, no. And they were wearing these until the 90s. And in fact, I talked to some women who said that even when wetsuits came out, when they were diving in their pregnancies, they're like, a wetsuit doesn't fit over a pregnant belly. So we just went back to cotton.
Right. And it makes you way more buoyant. It's harder to get down deeper.
Yeah. So you can see here, these women are not wearing weight belts because they were diving in cotton. So they didn't have that, issue with the flotation. Now they're using weight belts because they have, these thick wetsuits. And I think in this picture, they're probably also not wearing fins.
Did you study their eyes at all or their vision?
We have not yet. There was a study that was done in the Moken, which is another group of sea nomads in Thailand. And that suggested that they actually have better underwater vision than other people. The results of that were kind of dismissed because the same person who did that study did a follow-up study where they trained people in Europe to see underwater, and they could achieve the same level of underwater vision through training. But I think this is really flawed logic, and it's been applied in a lot of these kinds of adaptations because it's like, just because, I can train to run a marathon, that doesn't mean that I have the same genetic predisposition as someone let's say from Kenya, who has a different like limb length proportion than I do, So I think this idea that I might not be explaining it very well, but that you can train, like just because someone can train to reach a certain level doesn't mean that makes another person not special of that. I'm not articulating it well.
Right. Well, they have to do like far more work.
Yeah, exactly.
To achieve the same level of success
right.
as the person who can do it naturally.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if that's the case with vision as well, but it's not something we've been able to test yet.
Wow. And Steve, find a picture of the other group, the Indonesians.
I took some of those pictures.
Oh, really?
The one where he's holding the mask, actually. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. Oh, wow. And this guy's not even wearing a mask. Look at that guy.
Yeah. Yeah, so they have these kind of wooden goggles that they used until fairly recently as well. Kind of like that. And then now some people have switched to the full mask, but a lot of it's homemade. So I actually have a Bajau spear gun on the wall in my office. That's you can see like the tension comes from bike inner tubes, and it's all homemade. It's very cool.
Oh my.
With the goggles, I have no idea how they get a seal. And I don't know how they avoid like a squeeze too, because they're diving super deep. That's one thing that's a little different.
How deep do they go? We don't really know, but one researcher went to a competition with some Bajau divers, and they dove to 70 meters, which is over 200 feet, with just a weight belt. They're incredible. Like their ability to dive deep is really. I bet a lot of them like die doing that because that's
how evolution works.
Dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's. The risk of shallow water blackouts when you're diving that deep is super dangerous. Yeah.
So that's like their natural selection is who can survive diving this deep in the ocean.
Yeah.
And like what cascading effect of like your bodily organs or like whatever it is can actually sustain that much pressure and stress.
Yeah, and we actually think that the adaptation that's making their spleen, like the genetic change that's making their spleen bigger, is actually increasing their thyroid hormone levels. So it's putting them into not like a hyperthyroid state, like a pathological kind of state, but just like a slightly higher than average thyroid hormone level, which we think is giving them a lot of different advantages. And
how so? How would I'm not familiar with how that would work.
Yeah, so the thyroid, it increases there's kind of like a sweet spot, we think, where we think it's actually increasing the amount of red blood cells that they're producing. And so that's part of why they have this bigger reservoir. It's just because they have more red blood cells. And so they're kind of stored, waiting to be accessed during diving. And we think that because we actually did some studies with mice where we were able to recreate the large spleen phenotype, we say, or trait, in mice. So we had these mice that we gave them a drug that inhibited the same gene that's different in this population, and those mice had larger spleens.
Wow, that's wild.
We did not train those mice to dive, but I would be very curious to see how they did compared to other mice. And actually, some humans, like our genome likes to be as frugal as possible, so whatever's out there, it's going to try to use as much as it can. But also we like to steal things from other populations. So like Tibetans have adapted to high altitude, and the genes that gave them that adaptation, we actually took from an archaic hominid. So like Neanderthals, but their Denisovans were kind of around the same time. So this kind of cousin lineage of humans. They had been living at altitude for 100,000 years or more by the time humans got there. And so humans mixed with them and kept the genes that gave them an advantage.
Humans bred with the Denisovans.
Exactly.
And created and then in turn created babies that had this gene that made them thrive in these super high altitudes. Wow.
Exactly.
That's another curious thing is like, why there's so many, there's like what, 500 something species of primates still today?
I don't know the number.
I think there's over five. I think I Googled it and it was like over 500 species of primates and only one species of Homo sapien.
Yeah.
How does that make sense?
We really don't know what happened because we had, Neanderthals, Denisovans, humans, all were there together. And, we've seen in ancient DNA samples from certain areas, like first generation crosses of Neanderthals and Denisovans. So we know that there was a lot of mixture happening because, what are the chances we would find that otherwise? And then, I don't know how we were the last man standing, but we took all the genetic material that we could from those other lineages before we wiped them out in some way.
Isn't it crazy though? Like how different we are.
Yeah.
Like there's no, like if you look at all the different primates that exist today and look at the modern human, there's them, then there's this giant leap, and then there's us. There's not like a gradual, I mean, a little bit. There are some people who are a little bit more ape-like. There's some people who are a lot more like evolved. But like not really. Like there's not really any like Neanderthals, like legitimate Neanderthals or people who are halfway between primates and humans walking around today. It's like either primate or human.
Yeah.
Which in like, if you just go to the primate population, there's such a wide variety. And I know the human genome's like is pretty also is pretty variable. Like there's a large variety in the genome, but like as far as like the species, we don't vary that much. It doesn't seem like.
Right. Yeah. Well, because we're pretty adaptable. I mean, we're really good at making technologies that enable us to survive in cold environments, hot environments, around water. Like we're really good at fishing, so we don't necessarily need to dive. And our physiology is very plastic, as we say in physiological research. Like it's changeable. We can go from, they're like boot camps, or you can learn to free dive and go from like a 30-second breath hold to a 2-minute breath hold in a week just by learning techniques or, working on different things with your physiology. So maybe it's just that we're so adaptable in a physiological sense that we haven't had to adapt that much in a genetic sense, because we can really take on most challenges pretty well.
Yeah. So what is the like simple conventional explanation for this leap from primates to humans? Like I know there's a lot that goes into it, but like there's a lot of fun theories people like to talk about that happen a lot on podcasts where like people like say a monkey, like one day a monkey ate a mushroom, psychedelic mushroom, and that accounted for the doubling of the brain size and all this stuff and developing technology. There's other ideas like panspermia, like comet fragments that hit the earth that had like alien DNA on them somehow mixed with primates, and that accounted for the evolution. I mean, there's so many, like people like to fill the gaps with things that are kind of like way out there. Like you could fill the gap with like God, you could fill the gap with aliens, you can fill the gap with psychedelics, but like there's no, like I haven't heard the conventional reasoning for it, at least not in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to focus on so much more recently than that in terms of looking at humans. So I'm kind of like out of Africa and later. Yeah, I'm not sure. But I'm also like, you know, as long as it's supported by evidence that's out there, and we do have really incredible, because we can reconstruct so much in terms of the genetic data that we have from present times and then kind of rewinding back in time. So, you know, to the point where we can date when certain migrations happened and things like that, just based on modern DNA. So, yeah, but then, you know, beyond a certain point, I guess it probably becomes more difficult because so much time has passed. But that's kind of outside of my, which I know is a cheap answer, but outside of my area of expertise.
Right. Yeah. No, but it's fun to speculate on this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, do you think it's possible that our evolution has been linear, or do you think it's possible that there was like a reset ever in history of human evolution?
Yeah, as far as I know from the genetic data that we have, there's no evidence of that. Like there's not like some weird piece of DNA that we don't know where it came from. I mean, there is, in the sense that we knew Denisovans existed before we found the first Denisovan bone, because we said, okay, there's this bit of DNA that's coming in a certain part of the world at a higher frequency that seems to have come from like a parallel lineage to humans. So people hypothesized that there was this other lineage, and then someone found like a pinky bone in a cave, and sure enough, that matched perfectly to this piece that we had.
Right.
So, you know, we're really good at kind of seeing, okay, there's a piece that doesn't quite make sense, but we think this is about when it came in. And then luckily, you know, we were able to confirm that with this bone and ancient DNA, which is an incredible, you know, leap in terms of technology. But yeah, otherwise I'm not aware of any gaps that is as fun as it would be to speculate in that, especially coming from like an astrobiology background.
Right.
So I was thinking a lot about how different molecules could reach the Earth on comets, on fragments of meteorites, things like that.
Yeah, and there's just so much history that we have I mean, even going back to like 2,000 years ago, like we have no clue what the hell was going on back then, you know? Like we can look at obviously like DNA stuff, and like we have ancient texts, and we have writing, and we have, you know, paintings and stuff like that. But to actually like go back and to, you know, because I always wonder, like, was there a time in history where we were on a different evolutionary or technological trajectory than we're on now, you know, that made us like, and this is another interesting thing when it comes to genes and genomics, is like intelligence. Like did we have like a super high intellectual capacity far back into the past that was just a different type of intelligence, right, than what we have today? Because today, like if you look at the trajectory humans are on with technology, it seems like we're compensating for a lot of our brain power and a lot of our intellectual power with technology, and we're just developing new and new things that people like to buy and people like to use to make tasks easier.
Yeah.
So like I was just like how does that affect the evolution of us? Where do we end up on this current trajectory with AI and all the self-driving cars and Uber Eats? Where do we end up in you know 50,000 years? Right.
Well, one thing that you said I feel like is related to a very important point, which is that, you know, when we talk about trajectories, I feel like we have this, we're so trained that evolution is leading us in this like better, brighter, smarter direction. Like we have this image of like ape transforming to man, you know, and it's like we are the pinnacle.
Right.
Everything's getting better all the time. And that's like, evolution doesn't have a direction. It doesn't care. It's just about being, it's not about being, I mean, you know, we say survival of the fittest. It's the best fit, not the most fit. So if our environment changes in a way where being super intelligent doesn't actually help us that much, then suddenly we're not going to be selecting for that. We're not going to be evolving in that direction. So it's really just about being the best fit to our environment.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think it's like, we have this skewed idea that, of course, centers us as being like the ultimate apex of evolution. But I think that
the people who are the most adapted to their external environments
yeah,
are the ones that are going to evolve.
right. So like, at the time of dinosaurs were totally on top of everything. They were the perfect fit to the earth as it was at that time. Humans' ancestors were just these little rodents running around at night because that was the only time we could avoid the dinosaurs. And so because of that, people think we were adapted to colder temperatures because we were going around at night. And again, these are like rodents, these are very, what we would think of now as like poorly adapted or just kind of very primitive animals.
Right.
Meteor hits, suddenly the whole earth is transformed into this much colder environment. And now the dinosaurs are very poorly adapted. They're a bad fit to that new environment. But we, as the night dwellers who are better at handling cold temperatures, are suddenly the best fit. So despite the fact that we're these like tiny, pathetic little creatures, we're suddenly on top of the world from an evolutionary perspective because we are the best fit to this new environment.
Oh, wow. I've never thought about it like that. That's really interesting. Now, I mentioned to you briefly about that Mike Masters book before we started about this idea of pedomorphism, how primates, the offspring of primates, they look more like fully grown adults today, where they sit up straight and they have these like kind of like bulbous heads that sits up straight over their shoulders, and they look like normal, fully evolved humans today. But when the primates get older into full adulthood, they change. Their jaw protrudes, their head slopes back, and they sort of hunch over. And he says that this is an evolutionary thing, that it looks like if you extrapolate that into the future, the fully grown adults in the future will look like the children of today, more like a toddler of today would look like a fully grown adult. Do you know anything about that, or is that?
I hadn't heard of that. It's an interesting idea. The one thing that I would say is that, again, coming back to this idea, you said extrapolate, like that's assuming that evolution is happening in this like linear directional way.
Right.
And it's just like so hard to say. It's like the thing where people say, oh, our pinky toe has been getting smaller over the past 100,000 years. Therefore, eventually we won't have one. And it's like, well, no, as long as natural selection isn't acting against that, as long as if someday it becomes really sexy to only have four toes, then the population would change in that way. But otherwise, we're just going to stay kind of how we are. Like you need natural selection to drive a change like that. Things can change just randomly, but usually natural selection would be required. So if there was something that was selecting for, and maybe that's part of the hypothesis, I haven't read the book.
There you go. There's an example.
Yeah. So if there's something about the current state of toddlers, human toddlers, that becomes more advantageous in the future, then totally we could evolve to look more like them in the future. But otherwise, we'll probably just stay pretty much the same.
Well, it makes logical sense if you look at technology taking over for the need for us to do like physical things, right? We don't need big muscles. Like we need like toddlers have bigger heads compared to their bodies. We would use our heads more. We would be skinnier. We would be smaller, more frail because we would rely on technology to do this stuff. And obviously technology has been advancing since we were first able to create fire, and that's changed the shape of our jaws and things like this, the shape of our heads.
Yeah.
We don't need giant hands anymore.
Yeah.
So I think technology would probably have to have a big part of that, as long as technology keeps evolving and keeps, and who knows what happens when we reach some sort of like technological singularity. Maybe we just get wiped out. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it seems like that has a lot to do with technology, changing our anthropomorphic look.
I mean, you could certainly say that like in our current environment, maybe, our heads will get bigger because it's advantageous to be smart. But then if you look at, have you ever seen the movie Idiocracy?
Yes.
Okay.
It's been a long time. That was a good movie.
With one caveat, that is, in my opinion, the only accurate portrayal of evolution I've ever seen in a movie. So, you have a lot of movies that talk about evolution. Most of them get it wrong. Like I love the X-Men movies, but those, it's even the movie Evolution is like not an accurate portrayal of evolution. Yeah. But Idiocracy starts with the idea that essentially stupid people are having more children than smart people currently.
Yeah, right.
And therefore, in the future, more of those children are having more children, and these like stupid genes are being passed on to the point where, I forget how many years into the future, everyone is really dumb. And so an average person currently becomes a genius in the future. And it's a very funny, very silly movie. And I would say the one part, my caveat to it being accurate, is that we haven't actually ever identified like a genetic contribution to intelligence because it's such a complicated thing to measure.
Right.
But anyway, if that were true, then absolutely, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this, but if you think about the people who are having many, many children and think about that potentially driving the selection of our species into the future, it's just hard to predict what's going to increase, in frequency in the next generation.
Yeah. Well, definitely if you think about it, the smartest people in universities and in labs, they aren't raising tons of kids, right? They're more focused on their work and whatever they're doing. And it's a much more focused thing where you're dedicating all of your skill and all of your time to mastering something or to figuring out a problem. And again, that's true. That is true.
Is that intelligence, or is that, how you were raised and education and all these other things? Like, that's a whole other debate. But yeah, it's just to say that, like, I don't necessarily see a strong selective pressure driving us as a population, a human, species, to be smarter, have bigger heads, et cetera, in the ways that we kind of think.
Well, maybe the big heads doesn't have to necessarily do with being smarter.
Right. Yeah, it might not. But again, like, unless people with big heads are having more children, or people with small heads are not having children, then there's no reason for us to move towards big heads.
And it also seems like we may evolve to be, is it possible that we evolve to even being sexless in the future with AI and with genetic engineering and things like this, where we're not procreating the same way, like by having sex anymore. It's not this primitive thing we do anymore.
Right.
Now it's just like we use science and technology to create the perfect kid. We don't need to do it that way. That's too primitive.
Well, and that's so interesting. I mean, that would be like a cultural evolution that could totally change everything about our species, because if you don't, then the rules of evolution as we know it don't apply anymore, because you're creating that human in a way that our species has never done in the past.
Yeah, and that's like one of the points of Michael Master's book is he connects it to like all of the worldwide depictions of these little gray aliens that people talk about and people allegedly see, that are they seem to be genderless, have no sexual organs, and they look like toddlers, right? And have these big eyes, like they were adapted to see in the dark. Yeah, and he basically he has this elaborate theory that which is like, it's out there, but it makes sense in that realm, that like if we were to evolve hundreds of thousands of years into the future, is it possible that we could end up looking like that, right? And then if there was some sort of like nuclear war or some sort of cataclysm that wiped out a large swath of humanity, that we could maybe, if we were that far advanced, maybe we could figure out time travel, go back and select from the genetic pool back in the past, and to repopulate the species in the future. That's his whole hypothesis, which is wild.
That's fun.
It's fun. It's super fun.
Yeah. Thinking about evolution in the far future and like all the ways that technology is going to be able to influence these things is very fun.
What do you think do you think overall the appearance of human beings is going to be drastically different in like 100,000 years?
If we make it there.
If we make it there.
I mean,
what would stop
it's hard
us from
to
making
say.
it?
I would say that climate change poses a very interesting threat because, we're very adaptable. Evolution works really well when there's a consistent and gradual threat, or I guess in the case of the dinosaur extinction, maybe you just get wiped out completely. But the problem with a changing climate is that you can't be adapted both to drought and flooding. You can't be adapted both to really high temperatures and cold. There's so many different factors. It's not a consistent pressure. And I shouldn't say that you can't be, but it's just much harder to find some kind of genetic change that makes you better at all of those things that come with a changing planet. So yeah, as long as change is happening slowly enough that there are some people among our population who can adapt to it and pass those genes on to the next generation, then sure, we can adapt. But if it happens too quickly and too erratically, then it becomes very hard to evolve.
When you say climate change, you mean the warming of the climate?
Right. And like the increase in these, like outlier weather events. So like in Utah, we have been in a drought, but we also had the highest snowfall season on record a couple years ago. And so it's like within the same season, essentially, we had, devastating avalanches as well as, one of the driest summers on record. So it's like it's very hard to find a physiological change that makes you fitter in both of those environments, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So more extreme weather events in shorter amounts of time, and that could like somehow bottleneck humanity. It
just makes it so that when you have when everybody's diving, then there's a consistent selective pressure. There's one thing that everybody needs to adapt to, but when there's many different pressures happening all at once, then it's just hard to be more likely to survive that.
Right. Well, but if you're in different parts of the world, wouldn't those things be consistent? Like in Florida, the coldest it ever gets is like 50 degrees. And the hottest, it gets freaking hot. It gets like in the hundreds, and it's humid, and we get hurricanes and floods. But there's never any snow. And so there's never any free, it's, it doesn't go below 50 degrees. There's never earthquakes. There's, it's fairly consistent. I don't know if that's like that in other parts of the world. I can't speak for Utah. But
yeah. In that case, maybe the future everyone looks more like Floridians. But then there could definitely
whatever
be
part of the world they live in, right?
Yeah, there could be a bottleneck for sure.
Yeah. And wasn't there a big bottleneck in the genome 100,000 years ago or something like this?
So the out of Africa migration represents a huge bottleneck. So there's much more genetic diversity within Africa than in all of the rest of the world outside of Africa. Even though, I feel like it's easy to look at populations in North America and East Asia and say, wow, they're so different. But actually, on a genetic level, in terms of single changes in the genome, we're more similar than some populations within Africa. So that's one bottleneck that happened. But then within specific subpopulations, there was a bottleneck in the populations that moved into Greenland. So there's some very interesting genetic changes that happened in the Greenlandic Inuit because of that bottleneck.
And how do those bottlenecks happen?
Oftentimes it's founder populations. You just have a small part of the population that leaves a place or goes to a new place. Sometimes there's, catastrophic events or diseases that bottleneck a population as well.
I had a gentleman on here about a year ago who was he worked on the Human Genome Project for MIT, and he was explaining to me something like that all humans on Earth basically are genetic descendants of a total of 10,000 people or something like that.
Yeah. So this is called the effective population size, which is just such a crazy, you can represent, if you had 10,000 genetically unique individuals, you would represent all of the genetic diversity of the planet, which is bizarre because, there's a lot of us.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is so crazy that that's we're all so close. It seems like we're really all a lot more closely related than we think.
Yeah, exactly.
Coming only from 10,000.
There's also this mitochondrial Eve that you may have heard of. So you inherit your mitochondrial DNA
From your
exclusively
mother.
from your mother.
Right.
And we all essentially, if you go back far enough, come from one woman who's called Mitochondrial Eve.
Really?
Yeah.
Mitochondrial Eve.
I mean, it's been a while, so there's a lot of variation in terms of where we've ended up.
And how many mitochondrial Eves do we think there could have been?
Just the one is.
Just
I mean,
one.
Everyone on Earth, we think, as far as I know, hopefully I'm not getting this wrong, but is descended from this one mitochondrial Eve. That doesn't mean there weren't other women at that time. It's just that the descendants happen to be from this one mitochondrial Eve.
Oh, that's fascinating. Wow. Mitochondrial Eve, the most recent common maternal matrilineal, I guess that's how you say it, ancestor of all living humans, meaning everyone alive today can trace their mitochondrial DNA back to her through an unbroken line of mothers. She lived in Africa approximately 150 to 200,000 years ago and was part of the larger ancestral population. Wow.
That's amazing, right?
That is totally amazing.
It's not that long ago for us to all have been related to one person.
When was the what were those footprints that we found in the desert in like Nevada?
Sand flats? Yeah, they were the sand flats.
Yeah, but there was a name for this. Oh God, we've talked about this before. White sands, the white sands fossilized footprints. How long ago were those supposed to be? And this goes back to the that's 23,000 years ago. Okay, and I guess it's speculated that this pushed back the Clovis first hypothesis, right?
Right.
Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
So the idea was that Homo sapiens weren't populating North America that early. And then we found these footprints and this pushed it back quite a bit farther.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And they supposedly came from the Bering Strait land bridge. Is that right?
Yeah. And there was, again, of course, being a geneticist, I'm biased, but there was genetic evidence that suggested that some of the population of North America was happening much earlier than people thought as well. And I do think there's a certain amount of like European-oriented bias against the population, because it's like, oh, did people really make it that far that long ago? And because we think, it took Europeans so long to get there that surely it would have taken other people longer to get there as well. But yeah, there's evidence that people were in Patagonia 10,000 years ago. Right. So yeah.
And there's also people who speculate. I mean, how much have you talked to like people in other disciplines that look at this stuff? Like, have you talked to geologists or any other types of people, anthropologists?
I talked to a lot of anthropologists. Yeah. A lot of, I try to incorporate history because I really do think that a lot of times like history and anthropology and all of these things like really inform the science. I also talk to the people themselves because oftentimes people have their own stories to tell that they're often
they watched cool documentaries and think they have it all figured out.
Well, I'm saying more like like cultural, like oral histories that populations have about where they came from, how long they've been there, their connection to a particular place. Although it's funny, I was asking the Bajau what their where they thought they came from, and I was expecting some kind of answer like that, or about like the sea gods or something, and they were like, oh, Borneo, and I was like, okay, that's very factual, but
interesting.
Yeah, I think it's important to weave in all these different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times that's where some of these cool scientific hypotheses come from. Like there are oral histories in Aboriginal Australians. I'm actually about to speak to someone about this. That talk about a group of people that sound very much like the Bajau. And so given how close those are geographically, it totally makes sense that there would have been interaction between those peoples. And so, it'd be cool to, in cases like that, match potentially genetic data with oral histories and things like that.
Yeah. When it comes to people who like have trouble conceiving, there's all these evolving technologies that are coming out that are helping people have kids, whether it's like freezing their eggs or freezing sperm, vice versa. I don't know how it all works, but there's a lot of people, a lot of which who I know who are my age in like their mid 30s, and they can't have kids to save their lives, and they're trying everything they can to have children. I've had experts in this field explain to me that that's a bad idea. It's a bad idea, not necessarily like from a moral perspective, but from like a evolutionary biological perspective, because it's supposed to be the body. The case they made was that's like the body's that's evolution's way of filtering out mutations or something like this.
Yeah. I mean, it's complicated because,
and it's also age. I think age has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. So age is a huge factor. There's a reason they call I think it's like 34 and up women geriatric pregnancies, which seems crazy. It's like not that old.
That's what they actually call them that.
Yeah. I forget if I think 34 is the cutoff. At that point, you're geriatric, because at that point, your risk of having some kind of your child have some kind of genetic disorder is just so much higher, and that's because as women we produce all of our eggs right up at the beginning, and so the longer they're in our body, the more chance there is for mutations to build up. So that's something that's happening. It doesn't mean you can't have a healthy child, but it certainly means that your risk is higher.
Right.
We used to think that was just women. Men also, we are finding, have more mutations as they age, so the chance of passing on those mutations increases as the father gets older as well. So you've got,
interesting
ingredients going in of questionable, the sell by date as we're getting close there as you're getting older.
Robert De Niro had a kid, and he's like 80, I think.
Right. Yeah. So there was actually some really incredible work done in Utah, because there are a lot of families in Utah that have, 17 kids or something like that. And so they were actually able to look at the rate of mutation over the however many years those kids were born and see which mutations were coming from the father, which were coming from the mother, and how did those rates change. And they did see a difference in the number of mutations that was inherited from the father as the father got older. But then you also have this factor of maybe people aren't having kids not because of any of those biological reasons, but because of forever chemicals in the water. That affects fertility. I think microplastics affect fertility. There's all these other environmental stress affects fertility. So it's what's driving those individuals not to be able to conceive? Is it biological factors? Is it environmental factors?
Right. Well, we had Dr. Shauna Swan on here a couple of years ago, and she was explaining how they've been sampling the sperm count and the testosterone levels of men since the 50s. And it's been going down by 1% per year since the 50s. And she says since the mid 2000s, it started going down by 2% a year.
Okay.
And
so we must be getting low.
I was she asked me, she's like, can you guess which areas of the country have the lowest sperm counts? And my guess was I was going to be the populated cities, all the, cars going everywhere. You're living in a little box and you're not as healthy as you're living out an open farmland. She goes, no, the people who live on the farms, open area, because of all of the chemicals they spray on the crops and everything like that. And the glyphosate, which was crazy to me. And, that combined with the microplastics that are everything is plastic. Our world is designed to make money on things by making them cheaper, more affordable, more efficient, and plastic is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Everything's plastic. 99% of this room is made of plastic. And she was explaining how that's very, very bad for human beings. And if we want to propagate our species into the future, she's like, I don't know what we're going to do, but we're not going in the right direction.
Yeah. And then, people have to resort to things like in vitro fertilization or freezing their eggs, like you said. I mean, that circumvents, some of the mutational issues that I was talking about.
Freezing the eggs.
If you freeze your eggs early, then they're the fresher eggs, they're not aging with you. But then, once you get into in vitro fertilization, then there's stuff how do you pick which embryo you're going to carry forward if you do have a successful, if you do have, is it? I forget exactly what they call it. But anyway, if one...
the implantation or whatever?
Yes, yeah. Okay. So then there's then you get into people are starting to filter based on genetics, and that's a whole other weird ethical
Designer
debate.
babies.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very complicated. That's why I have dogs only.
Oh, you choose to
Yes,
not have kids?
I am intentionally childless. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Dogs are awesome.
I love my dogs. Yeah.
Is it possible that when some people get together and try to reproduce, that sometimes nature just says no because this is not a good mix?
Yeah, that's certainly. And there's something really interesting that's happening in our world, which is that with globalization, we're having combinations of genes that have never happened before in the history of humans. So, you have people from different parts of the world who have been separated for 50, 60,000 years. And so these combinations we're finding sometimes introduce diseases that have a genetic basis that we didn't know were possible.
Right.
So that's certainly a possibility. And yeah, in that way, the body just says, nope. But then also it brings up the possibility that maybe some of those combinations will do some really cool things for us as humans because they've never been, in the same individuals in the last 60,000 years.
Let's pause real quick. I can use the restroom.
Yeah,
We'll be right back. All right, we're back, folks.
Okay.
Steve just found an article about how a third parent's DNA can prevent inherited diseases, published just a couple months ago, July 16th, 2025. Scientists can protect children from being born with certain devastating genetic disorders by creating 3-parent babies, according to results of a landmark study released Wednesday.
So this is, you have, in the normal way, the genetic material from the mother and the father, but then it's when there's a problem with the mitochondria. And so instead of getting the mitochondria from the mother, you can get the mitochondria from another person, a third parent, so that this individual will still have, if you only looked at their normal chromosomal DNA, they would look like they're just a product of their two parents, but then their mitochondria are from this additional individual.
Oh. Would it have to be a woman? Or can you get mitochondria from a man?
Yeah, you can get mitochondria from anyone.
Oh, really? Wow.
It's just that mitochondria usually comes in the egg. And so that's why you inherit your mitochondria from your mother.
Right. Wow.
This was a very cool example of science changing people's lives.
Scary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like just like crazy experiments we're doing on ourselves.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it used to be, like thinking about genetically modifying embryos or babies or humans or things like that. I would just say like, oh, we're just not there yet with the technology. But the scary thing is we're there, we can do this. But, now the question is, should we and what should or shouldn't we do?